Working Cows Podcast, episode 326. This episode is brought to you by Wally Olson. This episode is also brought to you by Ranching.fyi.
Welcome to the podcast that gives producers a platform to discuss and share paradigm-challenging practices. Practices that have increased the effectiveness of their operation and the joy that their families have received from this lifestyle.
Howdy, everybody. It's Clay Connery, host of the Working Cows Podcast, recorded exclusively in the C90 Ocean Minerals Studios. This episode is brought to you by Wally Olson, and he wants you to know about the His Cavy Foundation. Since April of 2018, they've blessed 11 families, held 6 events, and raised over $573,000. They use these fundraising events that they host to bless families with major medical needs. And they've got one such event coming up October 5th through the 8th. They'll kick it off with a Wally Olson marketing school on October 5th. If you give a $500 donation to the His Cavy Foundation, you are eligible to enter into the Wally Olson marketing school. After that, they've got ranching competitions, team doctoring, one-man doctoring, dog competitions, all going on the weekend of October 5th through the 8th. You can support by donating online. You can support by entering the trailer raffle online. You can support by entering in their auction that will be going on online throughout the weekend. Or heck, you can load up your team and head to Walden, Colorado, October 5th through the 8th and support this great foundation that is filling a huge gap in the ranching industry for families who are experiencing major medical needs. Check out the show notes page at workingcows.net/326 or go to hiscavyfoundation.com today to get involved in helping this organization. Very excited to be joined today by Alex Johnston. Alex is a guy who is making his way across the United States and just was in the neighborhood and said, hey, I'd like to connect and just get to know you a little bit. And I said, what the heck? You're coming from the UK. You've seen a lot of country here. You've been involved in ranching and farming in the UK. And so let's get your perspective on what you've seen coming across the United States as he worked his way north from Texas. And so we were able to sit down and record this conversation in my office here, just outside of Mud Butte, South Dakota. And so here is my conversation with Alex Johnston.
Alex, thanks for joining me today on the Working Cows Podcast. Welcome to South Dakota.
Thank you very much for having me, Clay. It's great to be here.
Yeah, so you've been on quite a journey over the last week or so. What prompted the journey?
I wanted to come to the States and explore ranching, particularly regenerative ranching, cattle genetics, grazing and sheep genetics here. I've read a lot about it on social media and thought this was the perfect opportunity to do so. I'm due to do Ranching for Profit at the end of September in Kennewick in Washington, so why not make a trip of it?
Yeah, that sounds like a great trip. And where did it start?
I landed in Houston on Tuesday and saw a couple of producers in Texas, one of which was Hobbs, Fire and Salt Beef. And then I've been driving since then. I met a couple of producers in Oklahoma, including a sheep producer, then a couple of producers in Missouri, mainly cattle, and then I was privileged to have a tour of the US Mark facility in Nebraska yesterday.
Yep. Meat Animal Research Center. Is it Clay Center, Nebraska?
Yes.
Yep. And what have been some of the things that you've noticed that are different than, were you raised in Scotland or?
No, England,
okay.
But Northern England, just over the Scottish border.
I see.
So I'm close enough to Scotland that I can understand most Scottish accents, but I don't have a Scottish accent myself.
I see. All right. Okay, so what are some of the things that you've noticed that are similar?
Everyone's been so incredibly friendly. Almost without exception, I've not had a prior relationship to any of the producers I've visited. It's purely been people I've become aware of through social media or podcasts, and I've found them on social media, messaged them and set things up. And some people, in fact, that I didn't know at all previously. I Googled Oklahoma regenerative sheep grazing. Somebody had an article written about them. I found them on Facebook and messaged them. and everyone's so incredibly welcoming, and they're really, really generous with their time and their knowledge. I've had some amazing farm tours and seen some really excellent livestock.
And what are some of the things that are different?
The heat would be the biggest one. It was 60 degrees in Scotland when I left, and I dressed like I do now in a shorts and t-shirt. So when I stepped out the terminal in Houston and it was 112 degrees and 80% humidity, that was it was exciting.
Yeah, well, you have come in our hottest week of the summer was last week, and then this week looks like it's going to be warm again. So, but we actually, in our neighborhood, have had a cooler summer than average. So, I mean, it does we usually have at least a few days over 100 degrees, and sometimes we'll string a few of them together, but haven't gotten there yet this summer. I think we've been right around there, but we haven't gone much over it. So, how does that change the animals, or have you noticed any difference in the animals that you've been looking at as with regard to, or maybe it's due in part to the climate difference?
Yeah. So I inherited a beef herd when I took over the position a year ago in Scotland on the estate I'm on, and we mainly have Simmental cross cows. Our average cow weight will be approximately 1,700 pounds, but I have some big old girls that we touching nearly 1,900 pounds. Cows here are much smaller generally, although, as I said at breakfast, I have a certain amount of confirmation bias because I'm targeting producers that are within that regenerative space.
Sure.
So smaller, more efficient cows, high density grazing. That's the sort of thing that I'm looking at. That's the sort of thing I'm finding. I don't think that's maybe representative of your US industry as a whole.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. We've talked a little bit about that, about driving, around, you see that we're still in the minority, the people who think the way we do.
And that's very similar in the UK. A traditional British suckler herd would be set stocked at grass, normally from May through to about September or October, November, depending on rainfall conditions. And then they would be housed in a shed. It would be a full cut and carry system. They would have silage taken to them. They would have straw blown under them. And they would be carved in that shed, and then they'd turn out as they carve.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the first guy I talked to, maybe the only other guy I've talked to from the UK was Rob Havard, and he talked about, I think the first episode I did with him, we talked about outwintering cattle and that being the exception, like very, very much the exception in the UK. Yeah.
And that's something that we've adopted on the estate prior to my arrival. So we outwinter on a brassica crop with silage bales, and an electric fence is moved daily to give more access to the crop, and ring feeders are moved over another row of bales every day. It's dramatically reduced our wintering costs.
So is that something like bale grazing then?
Yeah, similar. It is basically bale grazing, but they would only be given access to a day's ration of bales at once because it's wrapped silage.
Right. Oh, I see.
And those bales are placed in and amongst a mixed brassica crop. Mm-hmm. This year we're using kale, canola and stubble turnips. So we've got the protein from the brassica crop and then the energy from the baleage. We try and use rye baleage because rye is grown as an entry crop for the kale. And although I'm not involved in the cropping side of the business, if the rye grows well enough, we can actually provide all the baleage for that field from the field itself. So all the nutrients produced on that field are being recycled on the same area. We're not having to import any baleage from elsewhere, which is a big cost saving as well. People dramatically underestimate the cost of moving bales around in terms of tractor hours and labour. I don't think in the UK you can run a tractor for less than £40 an hour by the time you account for fuel depreciation, repairs and maintenance and labour. So I suspect you're probably quite similar here in the US. It's got maybe cheaper diesel, but
yeah,
$40 an hour I think would be not far out.
No, I bet you're right. And this episode hasn't come out yet at the time of our recording here, but I was just counting. You burn diesel to cut it, burn diesel in our neighborhood to rake it, burn diesel to bale it, burn diesel to gather it, burn diesel to haul it, burn diesel to unload it, burn diesel to feed it. So if you can feed it where it was cut, you can cut that in half.
Yes.
And so that becomes a huge cost savings. And so was the management of the place that you're on, it was bought in before you got there on regenerative agriculture specifically, or would you say that they had a different term for it or idea of what they were shooting for?
No, it's regenerative agriculture, I would say. So I'm a cattleman on the Balburney home farm estate, and Johnny Balfour is our managing partner. The estate's been in his family since 1640, and land has been managed in hand directly by the family for at least the last 3 generations. So there's a family history there of wanting to steward this land and pass on this asset to the next generation in a better state than they inherited it, or under their management, under their stewardship. And David Aglin is our farm manager. That's who I work to directly. He's got a very wide base of knowledge of cropping and livestock, and he took up his position 12 years ago. Both David and Johnny are totally bought into regenerative agriculture. They began this journey before I took up my position, with particular attention to grass-based production. So Johnny is the chairman of the UK Pasture for Life Association. Our cattle herd receive no grain or grain supplementation whatsoever. It's all forage in accordance with the restrictions laid out by the Pasture for Life Association. They can be found on the website. But I think they were having a little bit of a challenge finding cattle staff that would buy into that to the extent that they were wanting. So although there is a lot of polywire on the estate currently, and cattle had 2 hectare paddocks that they were roughly moved into, the young stock and the cows had a separate rotation. So it was a struggle to get their rotation longer than 54 days. And we're a conception to consumption, a womb to tomb operation. We try and finish all of our own stock off the grass. And we've made some changes since we started there. Rosie and I, my girlfriend, we both run the cattle. We've got our stock dogs with us, so we can walk cattle anywhere on that estate really quite cheaply. The land isn't in a ring fence, it's not quite contiguous, but it's close enough that we can have a short hop for a mile of public road and then take the cattle in. So we've increased the area of the grazing platform for the summer. We've also put both groups of cattle on a single rotation. So I listen to a lot of stuff by Jim Elizondo and the Total Grazing. Although I haven't yet done his online course, that's on my to-do list. The rough idea is that the mature cows are on my robust stock class. I can use them to manicure pasture. So they will go into a paddock that's quite high, and I'll use kilos per hectare, but it's roughly equivalent to pounds per acre, of about 6,000 pounds per acre, and I want to eat that down as tight as I can to about 800. And then, depending on the time of the growing season, 30 to 40 days after that, my heifers and young stock can come through, and we've got a great stem to leaf ratio there and some really high quality feed for them. But because I've got different live weights in those 2 groups of cattle, we need to adjust the size of the paddocks. And so I spend a lot of time, and Rosie particularly spends a lot of time, with a mapping app and polywire. But since we took over, or since this year's grazing period started, which was the 1st of May, we have moved every mob of cattle at least once a day. And that's had a really dramatic effect on the volume of grass that we're growing. And it's also allowing us to identify which cattle better suit that system. So these large Simmental cross cows are probably not the ideal genetics, but we've sourced alternative bulls for use this year. The mature cows all went to either a Red Angus or a Black Angus. The Red Angus were extant on the estate. They had them when we started. The Black Angus we've brought in from the Dunluise herd in Dundee, and they are native population Angus. I think Geordie Suter there has the largest herd of native population Angus in the UK, and he produced the bull Gypsy Earl, which I believe is a 3-time Pathfinder bull here in the US. So, I think we've got a good genetic starting point there. And the idea is that these smaller frame score bulls will very dramatically reduce the frame score of these large Simmental cows. And then the heifers, I retained all my heifers this year, and we also sold out some pairs earlier in the spring that I didn't want to calve again. And then we used that money to buy in some more heifers from local producers who are on a system similar to what I would like to run. Out-wintered, grazed intensively, that sort of thing, low input cattle. I AI'd them to a New Zealand bull, and then we've swept them with the Black Angus bulls.
Is getting the semen from New Zealand a challenge, or is it fairly easy?
It's extremely challenging. So I didn't buy them directly from New Zealand. There's an Angus herd in Derbyshire, and he's got a bull that's an embryo from New Zealand. So I had semen from that bull. So although it's a Derbyshire bull that's given me the semen, the genetics are directly from New Zealand.
Sure. And so over time, is the goal to move more and more towards an Angus influenced herd? Yeah,
that's correct. So
and native Angus specifically, if you want to define that term a little bit.
Native Angus is it's like the original Angus, like they're the cows descended from Old Granny, and I think Geordie's got 5 of the original 7 bloodlines. But to my mind, no, we don't want to go there completely. They're too extreme. So my native Angus cows, we're running them just as commercial cows. We bought a micro herd. We bought 2 cows with bull calves at foot that were back in calf, and then a 2-year-old bull. And that 2-year-old bull went over my mature cows, and then all 3 of those native Angus bulls went over my heifers. I didn't think that the yearling bulls would be able to reach these tall Simmental girls. But those cows now are about 1,100 pounds live weight, which is too small for me. So my cut-off for processing carcass weights is it's about a 600-pound carcass. I don't want to go any lower than that, really, because then there's real financial penalties with the meat packers in the UK. The manager and the owner are doing a lot of work to try and add value onto the carcasses by selling to specialty wholesalers and butchers. And that's brilliant, that's really good, but that's the jam. Sorry, that's the cream. My bread and butter is the commodity beef to the processor. I can't penalise the value of my processor carcasses and rely completely on that specialty market at this time. So these
because there isn't demand for that, or
I wouldn't be comfortable relying on that demand at the moment. We've switched these specialty butchers, so it's switched the demand profile of the beef or the production from supply push. So right, I've got cattle ready, they can go, to demand pull. So they tell me how many cattle they want. We sent 3 cattle off to them the week before I came here, but then I've got another 7 that are ready. And we have a 30-month cut-off on prime beef in the UK. Animals over 30 months attract a financial penalty. Slight, but it's still there. And then animals over 36 months are not prime beef. They go as a cull animal, regardless of whatever other factors there are.
Let's take a quick break and hear a word from our sponsor today, ranching.fyi. Ever wonder what Olympic athletes have that we don't? Ever wonder if it's high-performance leadership and elite mindset training could help supercharge you and your business? The answers are closer than you think. Join us at ranching.fyi for the groundbreaking course, Zone Ranching, and tap into the same training that athletes, professionals, and business leaders swear by. Zone Ranching is a transformative 16-week program kicking off October 3rd. Discover your elite zone of high performance and leadership. Invest in yourself and your business today. Act fast, spots are limited. Visit ranching.fyi, click on the course catalog, and enroll now. Unleash your inner Olympian.
So the trip that you are taking here, was it initiated by a desire to go to the Ranching for Profit school? Or you mentioned at breakfast that you said you were going to a sheepdog or a dog training internship. Which one was there? Was there one that was first?
Which one came first? Yeah, Randall Walker at Sator Stock Dogs, and his dog training internship is what came first. He offered it last year. I saw it 12 months ago, but the time wasn't right for me with other projects going on then. But I emailed him and said I would love to attend. here's my CV, can I come in 12 months? And he said yes. And I thought, well, while I'm here, let's try and book up some other things that I'm interested in, you know.
Yep.
So Ranching for Profit was then arranged, and then Randall's expecting me at the start of September. And I thought, well, if I'm in the US anyway, let's make a real trip of it and see some people.
Yep. And some countryside too.
Yeah, it's been really interesting driving the distance, because I've started in red dirt country in Texas, which are in the grip of quite a savage drought. And coming north, Oklahoma is probably the closest I've seen to the UK, or Missouri. You know, that sort of relatively high rainfall area. Although I understand they had quite a dry summer. And then coming up here to the South Dakota, and I'll be going on to North Dakota and Montana later in the week.
Yeah. And we're just coming out of a drought. So 2 years ago, it was very dry. And then last year, we caught really timely rain early. And in this part of the world, we've got very heavy soils and mostly cool season grasses. And so if we can catch the rain early, it really doesn't matter that much if we get later rain, because our grass, we're not growing warm season grasses anyways. So last year, actually, I had better production than I do this year. And we've got probably twice as much rain this year as I did last year, but the rain came later and continued later. So it's just interesting. The timing is most important, at least in my experience.
And I would agree with that, even from my UK context. We're on about 32 to 34 inches of rain where I am in Scotland, but that can vary by 50% either side throughout the year. And because of our northerliness, when we get into May, we get a real explosive spring growth, because the temperature comes right. If we've got the moisture, we can have up to 20 hours of daylight. So we'll be growing over 100 pounds of dry matter per acre per day. It's almost impossible to manage that grass without at least some of it going to head. But because I've got this robust stock class in my mature cows with calves, they've got a big room and they can digest and utilise that lower quality forage, so it doesn't really matter if it gets ahead of me. They manicure the feed for the stock classes that follow them.
Do you think that the mature cow weight is too big on those bigger Simmental cows, or do you think that you can sustain a bigger cow there?
No, it's too big, and I am seeing that now. Although we didn't take over the herd until August, we had an input in the management prior to that, because they knew we were coming. So in 2022, we had a 6-week bulling period, and that resulted in a 29% empty rate in these mature cows.
Wow.
And then calving in 23 was in March. It was in the shed. I was doing night checks, but we had an 18% intervention rate. Not all of that was calving assist. Some of it was dopey calves needed a hand to suck, or oversized teats or whatever. But I have a very strict culling policy, 1 strike and you're out. And I apply that to our sheep as well. I suspect within 3 years, 80% or more of the original Simmental crosses will be gone from the herd. They'll be culled out. My preference would be to sell them with a calf at foot. I think that's the way we can harvest the most value, and then buy back in heifers of a better type. But it's a challenge finding large amounts of heifers of the correct type that are run under the system I would want to run, and that's why we've not done a whole herd swap.
Sure.
But this year we've already identified cows pre-bulling that aren't maintaining body condition under the system, because we don't offer any sort of grain supplementation or anything. They have to do it all off grass. My ideal would be a cow that's about 1,300 pounds. I believe that is the best sort of cow I want. I want a low frame score, 1,300 pound cow that fleshes very easily and has excellent inherent body condition and fertility. And then I think that will allow me to harvest a steer of about 1,400 pounds at 20 months of age off grass, which is what we're targeting. That's going to be the cheapest way to do it. And as I get these smaller, more forage efficient cows, I can also increase the density of my grazing. I'd like to eventually move to a total grazing 4 moves a day system. And then that will also let me grow more grass, which will let me graze longer in the season. So I'm going to further reduce the expensive wintering period. This year, we plan to have cows on kale for 120 days. So that's a 30-day reduction. That's a 20% reduction from last year. And we would hope to continue and to push that. We might not achieve a total elimination of kale from the system. And there is a merit to growing kale for the cropping enterprise because it's a broadleaf, so it enables a real clean soil bed for the following cash crop. And also they find it useful to have the fertility building of the cow manure over that period. But we shall see.
Is kale a row crop? Planted as a row crop? Or?
Yeah, it's direct drilled as a brassica. Yeah.
Right.
It's part of that brassica mix, so kale, canola, and stubble turnips.
Sure. So earlier you said that they were struggling to find labor that would buy into this system. Do you know what the pushback was, or what the lack of buy-in was? Was it the regular moves, or was it the fact that we're going to have to cull a lot of these cows, or what do you know what that was?
I think it's both, to be honest. I have a little TikTok account and I enjoy making videos and saying what I'm doing, and I catch quite a lot of grief on there from people because I lay out my culling policy and people think it's very harsh. There's a mentality, possibly, I mean, I can't speak for the industry as a whole, but my perception is that there is a mentality among the industry that if you have an animal that's failing, you should put more inputs into that animal to allow it to succeed. Whereas within my system and my mindset would be that if that animal's failing, it is showing you that its genetics are not suitable for your system. Now, obviously, animal welfare is paramount, and that animal must be given any treatment it requires to ensure its health and welfare, and then it should be removed from your breeding flock or herd as fast as possible. Yeah, I've spoken on TikTok about how I cull sheep and things, and I think some people misinterpreted me and thought I was killing animals in the paddock on site, which is, I hate to add, definitely not the case. I'm not rich enough to do that, and you know, if an animal's lame or it needs assistance birthing or it needs worming, we will give it whatever treatment it requires, and then at the next opportunity it'll be removed from the enterprise and sold to try and recoup as much value as possible. There's 4 elements to a livestock enterprise, and if you think of it as a Venn diagram and they're circles, you've got labour, you've got animal genetics, you've got infrastructure, and then you've got inputs. And it's the overlap of those 4 circles is where your profit and success is. And if you want to remove or reduce one of those circles, then the other 3 need to put more in. Now, in my case, I'm trying to remove inputs, so I need better genetics or more suitable genetics. I need infrastructure and I need labour, because if I can improve my infrastructure, then it will reduce my labour. Currently, because we are on an adaptive managed paddock grazing system, we have different size mobs of animals in terms of live weight, so we need to adjust the size of our paddocks very frequently. We're almost completely rebuilding grazing systems for each rotation, for each different stock class. What I would like to do is put high tensile laneways in and remove as many internal fences as possible. So then all I need to do is put 2 80-metre cross fences in, and I can adjust the size of those paddocks very quickly and efficiently.
Yeah. No, that's similar to what I have, and it works. Ours are longer runs than that. They're 1,320 quarter mile runs.
Yeah.
So, yeah. But yeah, I can see the value of that. And in a more productive area, I would probably have narrower lanes than I do.
Yes.
So what have been your influences? I mean, we talked a little bit at breakfast that you didn't grow up in agriculture, but what have been the influences that have shaped your thinking and drawn you down this path?
People love it when I start dropping names here. It's good. There's a thing called the Nuffield Scholar Reports, which you're aware of. Yep. So you can access all of them online for free, and they're an amazing resource. And one of the first ones I read was The Farming Ladder by Mike Blanche. And he's somebody that is not from an agricultural background, and he's fought to establish himself as a farmer, and he now has a long-term tenancy in a productive sheep flock. And I call that my Bible. I read it monthly, and Mike loves it when I reference him. He gets very embarrassed. I particularly enjoy doing it in company if he's there. And that was the start for me, and it just made sense because of the UK tax and subsidy system. We are not able previously to have control of land for longer than 364 days. So it wasn't sensible for us to start pouring concrete or building buildings or anything like that. That combined with our low capital investment initially has pushed us towards a low input outdoor model. And then once you scratch the surface of that, there's an absolute plethora of resources available online. Hobbs at Fire and Salt Beef, he recommended I read Johann Zeitzman's book. And that was life-changing because that really gave me the desire to work with cattle as well as sheep. And it's what led us to our current position. So, that literally it's been life-changing. We moved 200 miles or 400 miles and started a position there. And it's a long-term relationship I hope that we have with the estate. We provide management labour for their cattle and dogs and quad bikes and our own vehicles. And in return, we get a house to live in, we get a monthly management fee, and then we can graze our sheep on the estate, although we pay a weekly headage grazing fee for that. There's a lot of information that comes out of New Zealand and Australia as well about breeding functional animals and low input livestock and the design of grazing systems and handling systems particularly. When you're handling large amounts of animals, which you do by necessity with this sort of grazing system because you have as few mobs as possible, so they're as large as possible, you must have excellent handling facilities to give stock flow and allow efficient use of animals. Otherwise, you're not going to handle them as frequently as you should do. And regular cattle moves or regular sheep moves means you can eliminate a lot of those handlings because you're not having to worm them or give other inputs, but you still must handle them sometimes. So we pregnancy diagnose all our cattle by ultrasound scan. We do the same with the sheep. The sheep get mineral bolus twice a year. We're moving to a similar system for the cattle. But there's loads of influences out there if you look for them. And it's great coming here and meeting people within the same regenerative mindset and space on this trip. It's been incredibly useful.
Would you say that the UK is ahead of, behind, about the same as far as regenerative agriculture, and the conversations that you're having over the last week, have they been, we were having that conversation years ago in the UK, or about the same place?
There's such a broad variation across both industries and within both industries. I think it would be very challenging and not very fair to make a judgment like that. I think people are all on their own individual journey, and where they are on that journey is a really personal matter, and it's entirely up to them. But it's really great to meet these producers that I have this last week, and they have taught me a lot, and it's amazing to see as well people that are in long-term control of land. And the Malson brothers, Tim and Randy, that I met in Oklahoma, they are buying parcels of land as they go. So I was able to almost see back in time, like this parcel of land we've had under control for 20 years, this for 10, this for 5. And that was really amazing to see, Or Laura Burant in Texas, she very kindly gave me a whole day in a guided ranch tour and was educating me on prairie grasses in the US. So this is little blue stem, and she showed me the big 3, switchgrass, Indian grass, and big blue stem. And then we went to her boundary line, and she had this amazing diverse pasture with, 4,000 pounds an acre of feed on it. And then you look over the side and there's a few sad little patches of little blue stem and a lot of bare ground. The rain doesn't stop at the property line, despite what some people think.
Yeah, for sure. You mentioned earlier a 60-day bulling period. Is that right?
42 days.
42. Oh,
Yep.
6 week. 6 week.
Yep.
What's
weeks.
typical in the UK?
It varies entirely.
Okay.
There's a huge variation within the industry. Some people never take the bulls out. Some people do 60 days, 90 days, 120 days. It can vary a lot. It's the same for sheep. So this year we had a 19-day breeding period on the sheep. 35 days would be more typical for sheep producers. But some people, there's a saying, a late lamb is better than no lamb, or a late calf is better than no calf. I disagree.
Yeah, let's make room for one that can calve in the window, right?
That's correct.
Or lamb, yeah.
Yep.
So it's interesting to me, a guy from the UK coming to the United States and wanting to go and intern in a dog training, because I would think dog training has been going on for a long time in the UK, and I would think of those guys as the ones that, so talk me through that.
If I was going to learn how to train sheepdogs or access sheepdog genetics, yes, I'd agree with you. But our dogs are so important for the effect we've had on the cattle enterprise. They've allowed us to increase the grazed area. They allow us to very efficiently move cattle. We can walk a mob of 140 head a couple of miles in a couple of hours. Now, if I was having to float them behind the tractor 20 at a time, that's very expensive and very time consuming. It would be, 15 hours maybe at £50 an hour. It soon adds up. And also, as carbon becomes more important, we're reducing our carbon footprint, because my little 400cc quad burns a lot less petrol than a big tractor. But we've looked hard in the UK, and we're struggling to find cattle dogs. We're struggling to find people that use cow dogs within a similar concept that we do. Or I'm not saying for a second that those people aren't out there, but I've not connected with them to date. Whereas Randall's dogs and his training methods are very impressive from what I've seen on YouTube and TikTok. And what I particularly like about his dogs is that they have the ability to self-regulate. So when moving any livestock class, pressure and release is how they're moved. And Randall's dogs appear to be able to release that pressure on their own decision-making on cattle. It's quite easy to breed a dog that'll just bite cattle and has a lot of push, but you need something that's got the brains in its head to not bite them. I would argue that that's almost more important at times, not biting or not putting that pressure on.
Yeah. What breed of dogs is he running?
Collies.
Okay.
Which is what we use as well. I've tried a couple of Kelpies. I've tried a couple of crossbred dogs. I was quite naive, really, when I started farming. I thought I could do things with cheap crossbred dogs. I got very lucky and was spoilt with the first dog I ever bought, and I've not been able to replace her yet. But she's 8, so I better get my finger out and get on with it,
Yeah. Would the intent then be to import genetics, or do you think that it's a training issue that you can train dogs to do what Randall's are doing?
So Rosie has a line of collies which are now starting to breed true to type, and they will face cattle. We can move fresh calved pairs with them. But I would also like to import a dog from Randall. That would be interesting, I think, and we can directly compare. I'd just be very interested to see his training methods and what his dog genetics are. And, I think he's a really interesting guy. I look forward to it.
Sure. Yeah, I don't mean to cut us short. We've got my family's coming up to say hello, so don't want to. Yeah, so we're gonna wrap up here, and obviously could talk a lot longer, but I appreciate you reaching out and stopping in, and just look forward to hearing about the rest of your trip.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here, and I hope to do it again someday.
Yeah, sounds good.
Definitely. Thanks, Clay.
Very good stuff there. Really appreciate him reaching out and taking the time to sit down and join me. Really looking forward to next week's episode. I'll be talking to Nick Jackson. Nick is a guy from Maine who has a lot of experience in composting, and he's gone a little bit different direction in how they are approaching composting and what they are doing to manage some of the food waste in their area. And I think it's a really just interesting business model where he's picking up food scraps, but also selling eggs back to some of those same people who are buying food scraps from him. And the food scraps go to feed the laying hens that he's selling the eggs from. So kind of a double income, two-way income stream there. So interesting business model, as well as some of the other things they've got going on. Looking forward to that conversation and sharing it with you real soon on another episode of the Working Cows Podcast. We'll see you then.
We invite you to visit workingcows.net to subscribe to the show via iTunes or Stitcher. You'll also find detailed show notes pages, resources from our guests, and the industry leaders who have influenced them. For more ideas on putting your cows to work for you in a more profitable way, tune in next week.